Well, it seems that Chapter Approved is indeed bringing some very early updates for the Custodes, a pretty massive buff to the strength of the book, with a huge amount of units getting points cuts. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking Chapter Approved, and the first of what I'm hoping will be a small series of videos looking at the different points changes for each faction in the game. It seems that we're starting with Adeptus Custodes first from Chapter Approved, as they're the first ones who have had their points leaked. People have actually posted some pictures of their points from Chapter Approved on the internet now, and it does appear that they are altered from the version in their codex, and bar one change, every single change is in the positive for the Emperor's Golden Boys. Let's talk through each point change and what it might mean for the unit in question. I must admit I was a little bit surprised to see Custodes point changes coming out quite so soon in Chapter Approved. It's only been a few weeks since the Custodes Codex dropped after all. One rumour that I've heard is that the Codex was scheduled to be released really quite a lot earlier, even before the initial billing date of December, and Games Workshop listened to some playtester feedback but only after the Codex came out, where a few of the people playtesting the Codex felt that it was a bit underpowered compared with some of the other ones that have come out recently, and to keep them up somewhere near the relative top, a few points cuts would be helpful. To be honest, the timing of this does make a lot of sense. Last time Chapter Approved released, there really weren't a lot of changes for the last few codexes, and to me I really don't think that this is the state of affairs that they'd want. It does look a bit silly to publish one book and then make all those points values redundant less than 2 weeks later. Even if you're being cynical, I don't think most people will have had the chance to go out and buy those models yet. In any case, regardless of that, the leaked images do appear that it is a pretty much universal buff for the Custodes, so we'll start by taking a look at the Codex changes, then move on to the Forge World ones. First up, and perhaps a slight surprise as the only nerf of the Codex, is the new Blade Champion model going up 10 points, going up to 120. I must admit I'm a touch surprised by this one. I guess we haven't had enough time for people to experiment and truly determine what's optimal in Custodes lists, but just based on the datasheet alone, I thought that the Blade Champion was kind of fine. Certainly a very solid combatant, but unlike the actual shield captains, he doesn't do all that much for the rest of the army in terms of leadership. It's interesting that he's gone up 10 points and all the other shield captains have dropped slightly. First, the standard shield captain is down to 105 points, the Alaris Terminator captain is down 10 points to 115, and the bike captain is down 10 points to 160. Valerian as well, who's basically a named shield captain, has dropped 10 points down to 130. Out of these, perhaps the most meaningful change is the Alaris one. He was 125 before, so he's significantly dropped, and I think with his extra wounds and the ability to take that Praetorian plate relic, it's really quite an interesting pick. Otherwise, this just seems like an all-round solid buff to the Custodes. I think it's rare that you've built an army of them without at least one shield captain, so that's pretty much a built-in points cut. Perhaps more surprising for me, though, was that Trajan Valoris appears to have dropped 10 points down to 160, and I must admit, out of just about any unit out of the Custodes Codex, I did already think that Valoris was perhaps one of the most efficient units in the whole Codex. Massive melee, great defense, really good buffs, and some decent power with the Moment Shackle. Not 100% sure why they felt the need to drop him by 10 points, but I guess it looks like he's even more of an auto-include than he is now. Otherwise, squads-wise, both the Alaris Custodians and the Virtus Praetors have dropped by 5 points. The Alaris Custodians were 65, now they're going to 60, and for the cost they're now looking really quite interesting indeed compared with standard Custodian Guard. An extra wound and attack, plus the very decent grenade launcher and free deep strike, perhaps does give you enough reasons to run these over standard Custodian Guard now. I think they were kind of alright before, but I can't deny that the Custodes Codex has taken away a few major options from them. That stratagem that they had for ignoring AP from incoming attacks was very powerful indeed. The Virtus Praetors are looking like great damage dealers too, now 80 points from 85. They did perhaps get a bit of a side grade in the new codex. Their melee is in a very similar place despite the rules changes. They gained 1 wound, and that salvo launcher with the melter attack is incredibly threatening, but this did all come at the price of OBSEC, which was really quite a shame for such fast moving and threatening bikes. They still do seem very nice though for having a really long threat range, and at 80 points each they're just all round more efficient. Again, good news if you're one of the people who had massive bike armies of them back in 8th. An interesting and quite helpful change for the war gear as well is that Misericordias now appear to be free across the board. In the latest edition, these 1 damage extra attacks cost you 3 points each for each normal squad member, or 5 points per characters. I think for the most part they were generally worth a small upgrade. Even if they were 1 damage, they were hitting at decent strength and very good accuracy. So you can basically see it now as every single model that could take one gets a very small melee buff for free. Will certainly help Custodians in general out against damage 1 infantry, I believe the only unit that now has to still pay for them are those Sagittarium Custodes from Forge World. They're the foot custodians with the bolt casters. The Misericordia is far more important for them than anyone else, as it actually gives them AP -2 melee as well as 1 extra attack, and it's still far more than worth the extra 3 points per model for them, as it makes them into a model that can do some fighting in combat. Finally, in a change that I very strongly suspect is going to be farmed out across the board, the Venerable Land Raider has gone down a bit. It's -20 down to 265 points, and I do finally feel that they might well be nosing the Land Raider into actually being usable. Compared with standard variants, it does get a 2+ ballistic skill and a feel no pain type save. I'm still genuinely not sure whether or not it would work as an actual transport for custodians, but it now seems like it could potentially be pretty irritating to shift, even as basically a static gun turret with a whole load of defense. Maybe it could be interesting to experiment with one alongside some Telemons or something. In any case, if the Custodian's Venerable Land Raider is dropping in cost, I can't help but think that the other Space Marine Land Raiders are very likely to go down as well. It'll be interesting to see if they do when we get more chapter approved details. Otherwise, this seems to be just about it for the core codex. No obvious changes that I can see for the other units or the Sisters of Silence, all of those seem to remain very similar. Overall, I think it's a significant buff to the power of the codex. 3 Misericordias and cheaper shield captains are very hard to go wrong with. Trajan Valoris looks even more awesome than before, and the Terminators and the bikes going down are also pretty nice for expanding the army's options. Finally, let's round up by taking a look at Forge World, where the changes are perhaps a little bit less pronounced, but still it's 5 solid buffs across different units. The Aquilon Terminators drop by 5 points per model, going to 70. Not too bad, I suppose. I guess they get strength 10 melee and some fairly general purpose shooting with those Storm Bolters, but when the Alarus Custodians are only 60 points, I'm not sure they're going to compete amazingly against that. Perhaps one of the most interesting changes, though, is the Telemon Heavy Dreadnought going down to 260 points. This thing's already monstrously tanky and has been a competitive staple in quite a lot of Custodes lists. I believe it went up by 20 points in the previous chapter approved, so that basically seems to have reversed that change. I have a feeling that they're still going to remain very popular. Maybe the only thing that might dissuade you from taking them is that scary Tau railgun. I feel that's the absolute last thing that a Telemon wants to run into. The Coronis Grav Carrier has gone down to 220 points base. That one's basically the transport version of the Caladius. It's a bit more tanky and has a little bit less firepower, but is quite fast and can transport Custodes really quite a long way. Again, I'm just really not all that sure that transports are particularly necessary for Custodes, not compared with just slogging more units up the board, but it's certainly a fair bit more interesting now. If you do want to use one, they seem a lot more usable than they were. Finally, there's some hefty points cuts to the flyers, with the Orion dropship and the Ares gunship both going down 50. Both enormous threatening flyers, so a big points cut doesn't really hurt all that much. Still though, I have to admit I will be wary with these. I feel like you could lose a lot of points if they do get targeted by some massive anti-tank. I think I still prefer the Ares over the Orion. Again, for Custodes I just don't really value the transport capacity all that highly, just compared with mounting more guns. Again, that appears to be it for the Forge World changes. I do feel that the bikes in particular are looking pretty badly balanced now. I felt that they were fairly similar in utility to the Virtus Praetors, and it seems a bit weird that they were overlooked for points cuts when the Virtus Praetors are now looking so much better. Misericordias still look like they'll be an auto-include on the Sagittarium Custodians, at least in my opinion, and I have a feeling that they're going to be issuing a Forge World FAQ at some stage for the Custodes, to apply any appropriate keywords to them or universal special rules that they might be lacking, so we'll have to look out for that in the future. Finally, I will bear in mind that lack of core is going to be an effective nerf to some of the bigger vehicles, the Telemon, the gunships and the Caladius in particular. They won't be able to get any rerolls from standard shield captains anymore, so they won't have quite as much synergy. Overall though, broadly speaking, it's great news for the Custodes. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think that these generous points cuts, in combination with their new codex and chapter tactics and things, put them in a position to be contesting the top spots? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly try and keep these regular 40k updates coming, hopefully with a fair few videos on the new chapter approved and any points changes. If you'd like to see any of that, feel free to subscribe. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.